Good morning, or afternoon when you watch this. I just wanted to record the evidence for evolution notes that we're going to take Monday, the 29th of November in class, just in case you need to hear them again. And of course, you can supplement this little lecture with looking at Bozeman science, evidence of evolution, and I also posted a little game on embryology you can look at. So the first one says type of evidence and shows a fossil, and that's a trilobite fossil, which we'll talk about a little bit in chapter 12. Um, it tells you how it gives evidence to evolution about species not remaining fixed over time, but also fossils have been found of extinct transitional species. And those are two that we looked at the first day of the class we did on evolution, the Tiktaalik and the Archaeopteryx, or a bird reptile transitional fossil. So another way you see examples in this is that typically you find older fossils the deeper the level of earth that you go into. So younger fossils are at the top rock layer, and it'll be older as the fossil as you go down in the rock layers, unless there's been a giant upheaval in the landforms. So let's go on to comparative anatomy. The closest a species is to another species, the closest would be their anatomical details. For example, we looked at the arm or leg bones. If you have closely related species, the bone structure will be very similar. For example, in primates, which you will look at tonight in the homework, you'll see how similar the arm and leg bones will be of different primates. Examples would be these homologous structures that we've talked about. So you get the same limb structure with just an adaptation for environmental conditions. So whether it's a bat or a whale, you'll see the same bone structure, one to many, as you would in a human, just adapted for different environmental conditions. Comparative anatomy, and again, there's a little game on PBS that you can look at to see four very similar looking embryos. The closer a species is to another species, the closest is their embryological development. They will look very similar until the very end when the adaptations will come out, tail or no tail, a monkey versus a human. Um, the even fish embryos have some very distinctive characteristics that follow all tetrapods, etc. So, for the examples, you follow the development of different animals, and common ancestors will show up in similar embryos throughout time. And this was studied even back in Darwin's day. There were people studying embryos of different animals and looking at their similarities. So, again, the first three were all looked at by Darwin in one way or another. The fourth one is what we consider the modern way of looking at similarities. The closer a species is to another species, the closest is their biochemistry. They misspelled their, THEIR. So you can look at DNA, enzymes, proteins, and the closer two species are related, the higher the percentage of similarity will be in any of those biochemical substances. For example, so they gave a couple of examples here. For DNA, um, the chimpanzee is a very close DNA match to humans, 98.77%, similar to humans. As far as proteins go, hemoglobin in humans and chimpanzees appears basically identical. And in gorillas, which would be another fairly closely related primate species, there's only one amino acid difference in the protein for the hemoglobin, which carries our oxygen. Okay, the last one is biogeography, and of course, this was a big part of both Darwin and Wallace's study. Um, Once organisms are isolated, they begin to evolve as they've been separated. At one time, geologists believe that all the land masses were joined in something called Pangea. And you see similar fossils where the land was joined at one time. So, for example, if the west coast, no, the east coast of China was joined to the west coast of the United States, you would see similar fossils in the rock. And indeed, they do, similar rocks and similar fossils in the rock. Now, the example for biogeography is what Darwin looked at with his adaptive radiation, where one species, due to environmental conditions, adapted into many different species. And those are the finches, the famous Darwin finches. They all came from the mainland, were swept probably to nearby islands, and then differentiated as they moved from island to island. Um, but there are many examples. Wallace's line that you looked at, where if the islands had been joined to Asia at one time, there were only placental mammals. If they were joined to Australia, when those land masses separated, according to geologists, many, many, many millions of years ago, you got the adaptive radiation of all the different pouched mammals, and so a totally different form of development in mammals. And there's one that is non-mentioned on here that you can add at the bottom, and that's artificial selection, because Darwin took a lot of study in that, because in his era of study, the Victorians were breeding dogs. And so the artificial selection of dog characteristics and finding many species of dogs with just 25 years of time or so was also something he noticed. So hopefully that'll help you on these notes.